y'all in cyberspace have it super easy, and that's why you're like a billion miles ahead of us, right? One way to look at my work is trying to bring some of the good characteristics of the world of bits to the world of atoms.
Well, thanks for joining me here, Patri. It's a huge pleasure to have you and speak with you. For me, it's been maybe more than 12 years, 14 years that I've been waiting to chat with you, I guess. Your ideas have been hugely influential on me, as well as your father's, David Friedman. And uh, I started with like a strong anarcho-capitalist leaning in my sort of late teens, and discovered your ideas shortly after, and have been kind of implementing them in my own way. Uh, so today I'd love to chat to you about those, maybe like how your ideas have evolved over the past decade or more, and how your approaches or strategies to realizing them have changed as well, and how you're thinking about things today. Um, but I guess before we get into that, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, I'm Patri Friedman, and I work to try to make new societies, previously through seasteading and now through charter cities,
Cool. I mean, so why make new societies?
because the old ones aren't very good.
No.
um, you know, I come at this from dissatisfaction with the current options for countries to live in. I think that countries mostly don't fit my values, and they're mostly not run very well. Like they're not run as well as like a mediocre business even. And I come from the software world, and a lot of my thinking is applying software concepts to government and laws. And in software, we just know that to get big advances, you need a small team to rewrite things, with a clean slate, using the things that they've learned to build things a new way. And I think we need this capability for government.
Absolutely. Um, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people might be familiar with, say, something like seasteading, but you also wrote one of the first sort of poker bots back in the day as well, right? Um, like that's also a body of work that I found of yours, because I used to live in Bondi Beach and would run poker bots on Poker Stars and collect on the rake. Um,
Hmm.
and I guess like you speak of your values, and the current governance systems don't work really well. Like, what are your values, and how are these governance systems today, and which particular ones aren't working for you?
Well, I'm a libertarian, and that's where I come at this from. So I want governments that don't go fight a bunch of wars. I want governments that let people mostly do what they want and kind of trust people to make choices that are best for them. But along the way, what's been grand about this idea is that I started out wanting the country that I would like to live in that doesn't exist. But I realized that to get that, I had to make it possible for people to start new societies, and that would let all kinds of people try out all kinds of ideas of a better society. And I might find out that someone else's idea makes a place that I want to live, more than my ideas. Or I might find out that even for my values, my ideas about how to build a society that produces those values are wrong, and someone else might get it right. But I don't know. Here in the U.S., we fight a bunch of pointless wars. We lock people up for eating the wrong plants. The whole like financial status of the government is just completely mathematically unsound and running into ruin. Um, just it's just a lot of things.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, if you look at how the United States is, running itself at the moment, and like how you might invest in a company, being in that much debt and not being able to recover from it, it seems pretty scary, for how to maintain a country and moving it forward. It doesn't seem particularly very sustainable to me. Um, so I guess like you talked about like the thinking about the country that you would like to live in, right? And then thinking about like how you would actually start to go, like how you would actually uh, pave the way for allowing not only yourself but anyone else to kind of create the societies that they would like to live in themselves. Um, I guess that led to your sort of 2002 dynamic geography essay when you started first publishing your ideas, or at least I think this is when you first started publishing these ideas, right? Um, could you talk a little bit more about the arguments that you were putting in there, on like what led to getting to the point where you felt comfortable in pushing your sort of ideas, politically speaking?
Yeah, I mean, that paper was kind of the theoretical basis for for all the work, and it brought forth this idea of competitive governance, where besides law as software, my other big foundational metaphor is looking at government as a business and all governments worldwide as an industry. And so I just pointed out that as an industry, the barrier to entry is insane. Like, you can start a new website with just like a laptop, but to start a new country, like we don't even know how. There's like no recognized process for that. Like maybe you find a territory that's easing its way towards independence. Like it's insane. And also there's really high customer lock-in. I can just go down to T-Mobile and switch from Verizon. But to switch countries, that's a big move. It's a big deal. And what I find beautiful about this is like you can just take out all of this like philosophy and morality and all these things that we fight over and just say like if you have an industry it's really really hard for any new firms to enter. It's really hard for customers to switch. Also the firms are like huge, just like massive. How innovative will it be? Like of course it's not going to be innovative if there's not competitors and your customers are locked in. And this is an analysis that just like to me, it's kind of like cutting a Gordian knot of like, oh, but the society doesn't have these principles, doesn't have that principle. You just got to like elect my guy or all of that. That there are these powerful structural factors that make this industry serve its customers really, really poorly. And then this analysis also gives us a way to fix it. That's not about convincing anyone about, what system they should use or even what mechanisms. It just says, hey, if we can make this industry more competitive, like by making it easier to start new countries or even new jurisdictions, which is the stage I'm at now with charter cities. Then we bring competition, and these new jurisdictions are going to be able to try really new things. Some of them will work a lot better, and then they can change the whole industry because if a major player, if an Apple sees a competitor who's doing a way better phone, they can either imitate it and make something as good, or they can acquire it. But if they don't do either of those, they're going to lose market share. And I think it's the same thing with systems of law, that successful startup jurisdictions will pull capital and people, human capital, away from the market leaders, the big countries, and they have to either adapt or die. So that kind of approach was the basis of everything since then.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I think these ideas really clicked for me in your talk that you did for Mises Brazil, I think maybe 12 years ago or so. Um, and I know like you've been working on seasteading prior to that, and like had been developing these ideas. But this idea that government was a product, and you could view government as a technology, and moreover, I was already having strong libertarian influences, and very aligned with anarcho-capitalism. But this idea of yours of like, well, no, just strip away all of the sort of ideology and the morality aspects of this, and let's just look at the sort of systems or the incentives around how we come about policies was absolutely like mind blowing to me, I guess. And uh, that kind of led me down a path of like mechanism design, right? And then in the sort of crypto industry, we fuse cryptography and game theory, and like we call it quote unquote crypto economics, where you create these mechanisms that would allow you to create these systems where you could then build any kind of policy on top of, or any kind of institution on top of it, or even have those mechanisms in the policies or institutions themselves. Um, which is, I mean, how did you like? How did that come to you at all? Like in the first place, is this like some conversations with your family, or is this like how did you find that out or like discover that for yourself?
Hmm. Well, it's definitely influenced by my dad, and by public choice economics. You mentioned the incentives, and public choice is this area of economics that just says, what if, crazy idea, politicians and people who work for the government don't suddenly turn into angels when they walk into the office? What if they're people like the rest of us who have self-interest and they act according to it? What happens if we analyze things then? Same for voters. Um, and so to me, this is just like meta public choice. It's just pushing it one level higher and saying, what are the incentives facing entire systems of government in this global ecosystem? And so, definitely was applying that way of thinking. I think I am kind of like a relentless, like meta-izer, like always looking to take things up to a higher level of abstraction.
Yeah, me too.
And then there was this one, I mean, my dad's books, both Machinery of Freedom, his ANCAP book, and Law's Order, his Law and Economics book, were influential. And there's this one particular paragraph in Machinery of Freedom which said, what if everybody lived in RVs? And if you had a jurisdiction that declared war, a city that declared war on its neighbor, and it was an unpopular war, then the next day, they'd wake up and there'd be a general and 7 war correspondents, and everybody else would have just decamped and moved on because who wants to be part of that? And we can't on land, we can't all live on RVs, but the ocean is actually kind of like that. And that's the title of the paper, Dynamic Geography, was this idea that on the water, when you can actually rearrange buildings and cities, that you are going to get an effect a bit like what my dad said, where if you can like threaten to, like, if a government doesn't reform, it can like actually lose, like city blocks can be like leaving this city and going to that city. And so if you think of the cost of switching on the water, the cost of switching is way lower because you can switch entire buildings. And so I thought, maybe the ocean is actually a better kind of fundament, better thing to build on. And it is better in that way. It's also very, very expensive, and so it's hard to make it work. But I also want to note that in space, you don't even need a giant diesel engine. You can like just get out and push. It doesn't move very fast, but you could push away a city. It's space; it has no friction. So maybe the other places that we humans build will have governments that work better.
Absolutely. I mean, so I can definitely see how, taking to the oceans or being in RVs would be able to reduce the switching costs, right? Or the exit costs within a particular jurisdictional system. Um, but the other one there is the sort of barrier to entry to even, get to a point of like developing out a new governance system, right? Like how do you think about that, and then how do you reduce that barrier of entry?
Yeah, well, one thing we're doing today with charter cities is that charter cities get to get kind of local autonomy over some part of the legal stack while using some of the laws of the host country, and of course the host country's constitution and treaties, which are always going to be inviolable. And the other thing is that, I'm in this to see the next like brand new systems of government, the new genius mechanisms that, might be way, way better. But today, the product market fit is that if you just look around the world and find the best bodies of law and copy them, and then bring them to a jurisdiction with honest courts, that this is already a big improvement over most of the jurisdictions in the world. I mean, even if you didn't copy from multiples, if you just said, let's just copy the entire legal system of whatever country works the best, well, that's a legal system that's better than all the other countries. And so this just bringing best of breed technology to places that don't have it, like that's kind of where we're at today. But the systems that are doing so, like this is the approach that Honduras Próspera, which is the leading charter city, maybe the only charter city by some definitions, is doing is you can opt into the regulatory system of, I think it's like any of the top 20 OECD countries. You can choose that, or you can use a regulatory system that they've cobbled together themselves by taking what they think is kind of the best bodies of law from different places and then trying to like reconcile it with each other. You can, in software terms, it's like all these modules that were written to like somewhat different APIs and trying to get them to all work together, which now should be better than any other. But they're creating this much more flexible modular legal system where if you were like, hey, I have this proposed biotech law that I think is better than any jurisdiction has by far, you can go to Próspera and talk to them and have them review, and they could adopt this biotech law, even just for your company or just for a certain block of office buildings, and try it out and see how it works. So even though we're just bringing current best practices to places right now, we're creating these just very different flexible frameworks, which will be easier for experimentation too. Last thing, this is a thing that Próspera did that I think is like so punk, is you also have the option in Próspera to opt out of all regulations, but you have to be within British common law, which includes things like suing people if they harm you. It doesn't mean you can do anything. There's all kinds of remedies. You can't steal, you can't kill people, you can't lie, and your board and your officers have to be personally liable for any damages, and damages are tripled. So it's like,
Oh, wow.
hey, if you want to go on a pure liability system, then you can do it, if you're really
Nice.
willing to put
Yeah.
serious skin in the game. So I don't know if anybody's elected that, but I think it's so punk.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you have the convictions, like, and you know, the assuredness in that, like, why shouldn't you be able to experiment and try with it, right? And then, you know, if everyone else is willing to accept the risk in terms of paying for 3 times the damages, then so be it, and I guess that's kind of the beauty of like introducing like market dynamics into these sort of into this realm, because then you can have this kind of experimentation. Um, but I guess like before we get to special like zones, maybe we should talk a little bit about seasteading. And so you're a software guy, you've had these ideas, you recognize the sea might be a little bit like this. Um, what was the journey like in establishing the Seasteading Institute? Getting it as popular as it became, and then the lessons learned from that endeavor, I guess.
Yeah. Let's see. I think, some of this stuff actually before I got funding and started the Seasteading Institute, I haven't talked about it a ton, but basically I was back in the early 2000s, I was on these two Yahoo groups mailing lists. One was called Floating Dash Cities and one was called Nation Dash Builders. Nation Builders was people trying to make micronations real, small group of, kind of crazy people. And when I read that sentence of my dad's, those ideas kind of mingled in my mind. I started thinking about seasteading, and I found this paper by this retired Sun engineer, Wayne Gramlich, and he basically proposed, he was taking this pure, like, just build it incrementalist attitude to a lot of floating city stuff. Like a classic was this book called The Millennial Project by Marshall Savage, which proposed building these giant power plants in the ocean that use temperature differentials in order to make power and bring up nutrient-rich water. It's a cool tech, but it doesn't work small. It has to be like huge. And proposing these like just like massive cities, it's pure science fiction. It's like total nonsense, disconnected from the world. And Wayne's like, how about we do this? There's a lot of 2-liter water bottles. Let's get 2-liter water bottles and like put them in nets and like take those nets and put tarp on them and put like dirt on that tarp and just make like really cheap giant islands. That in practice, that can't handle like any kind of waves at all. But it was like I feel like part of what I brought that's special to this movement, which I partly got from Wayne, is just this: how can we actually do it? How can we not LARP it? Starting new countries, that would be super cool. super hard. Like, what are the real steps that could plausibly get us there? Same thing for settling the ocean. And so Wayne, that wasn't the right tech, right? The tech he suggested is probably great for making like lake islands, right? But it doesn't work in the ocean. But the attitude was, hey, what can we actually build? And then we learned more about ocean engineering and started looking at spar platforms where there's a thin pillar, and then there's like a platform above the water, there's flotation below the water, and the pillar means that there's low cross-sectional area. And we started looking at these, and we came up with an idea to build, like, we had one that was in like a coffee cup, and one that was in my bathtub, and then one that was in my pool. And we were thinking we would work up to one that was in the bay and one that was offshore.
Right.
Now, again, it turns out that people use computer programs to figure out whether designs work, and if the computer programs work just fine, and you don't actually need to do this series of models, right? But the attitude was, how can we incrementally get there? It was the attitude of a builder. And so I worked with Wayne a bit. I wrote this book on seasteading where I just researched like all the different technologies that were out there. Like I'm really proud. There's a battery technology that I picked as my favorite, which was like redox batteries, like vanadium redox. That basically it's not good for portable, and it has really it's heavy for the storage, but you can use it like an unlimited number of times. Basically, it doesn't go bad like a lead acid battery goes bad. And it's actually it's something that's picked up quite a lot. It's being used more and more and more. So I just surveyed all these technologies and tried to figure out, as a builder, like, how would you actually do this? How does admiralty law work? What would your like businesses be that would bring people out there? And I'm proud of this. I'm a programmer. I spent 10 years at Google, and I had written my own blog, like blogging software, around 2000, when you couldn't just
All the
get
rage.
WordPress.
Yeah.
And so what I did with this book is I made it was compiled from Markdown, and every paragraph you could click to comment. And then you could see the comments that, other people made on the paragraph. And so I actually had like a loop of reader feedback, which was amazing. And I would just like edit the book and hit a button and would compile the new version, 21st century style. So that was really fun. And I gave some talks, had some people I collaborated with. And then in 2017, I had a live journal. There was actually blogging software by then, and I had this small, wonderful community of kind of heretical smart contrarians, including someone who worked for Peter Thiel. And I was thinking of leaving Google and looking at hedge fund jobs, and so he brought me in to talk to some of Peter's people. And they were like, no, dude, like seasteading is way more interesting than like another like math quant. Like Peter will be way more interested in that. And like, and we agree, like he should be. So they set up a meeting, talked to him about seasteading, and he said, all right, leave Google and start a nonprofit, and I'll fund it.
Cool.
So that was that part of the journey.
I mean, but then you're influential in like establishing like the ZEDIT program as well, right, in Honduras?
Yeah, I mean, my ideas were definitely like one big branch of what was out there,
Hmm.
and then I'd started writing about those from, I don't know, 2001 or two, and I got funding in 2007. Started the institute in 08, and then in 2009, Paul Romer gave his Charter Cities TED Talk, and I don't know if he read any of my stuff, but that was kind of another big thread that came together
Right.
in people's mind. And, with seasteading, I guess, I'm kind of frustrated with how little progress we've had since 2008. I think the ocean is really, really hard and expensive.
Hmm.
And in the, 10 years since the Zeta program started, I've been shifting kind of more and more of my effort and attention to land, because I think it's just, a lot more tractable. And at this point, it's all I work on. But, circa 2008, the Seasteading Institute just started this incredible movement, all this buzz. And we got millions of people around the world thinking like, hey, why can't you start new countries? Right.
Right.
We got that in people's mind.
I was
And,
one of them.
you know,
You know?
Yeah, and I mean, it had impact. We got made fun of by The Onion, The Daily Show, The Colbert Report. Like, you know, you're doing something right.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
what's that like? First they laugh at you, and then they, that sort of thing.
exactly. Then they fight you, then you win.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that you feel a little bit frustrated. Like, I mean, for me, like that those are huge wins. I mean, and I think, one of your arguments was that, for why some of this innovation in governance doesn't happen is because there isn't really a frontier, right? Like, most of the land is already occupied by existing governments or states, whereas previously you'd be able to, travel across the sea and arrive at a distant land and declare independence or something like this. And I guess this is kind of like
Yeah.
where I diverge a little bit, right? So like I'm a software and technology guy, and for me, like the frontier is kind of in cyberspace, and I felt like at least the way that I was thinking is a lot of your ideas mapped very well within that domain, right? So it's like
Yep.
the barrier of entry could be lowered certainly by taking to the seas, or if you can get up into space, you could do a whole host of things there as well. Um, but then I started thinking, well, what if you could go over the wires, right? Like, there's a lot of underserviced people around the planet that still have internet access, but they do not have like stable financial systems or functioning governance systems. And perhaps with technologies like blockchains, you could create or establish an order, and if you can strengthen it to be resistant to political bias or any kind of coercion, you may have an order that can establish global markets and deploy institutions, globally within 30 seconds or less. And moreover, your argument around switching costs or customer lock-in, you could also, to use one of these systems is largely voluntary, right? You have to transact with it, and if you don't like it anymore, you just stop interacting with the system. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't come with a whole host of other problems, all right? But in at least in establishing an order and deploying these institutions or these new sets of rules, for me, it's really viable. And what I also like about it, it's not incompatible with, seasteads or, public administration in a special economic zone or in a charter city either. So it's kind of, for me, the best of both worlds. I guess like one of my questions was like, you're a software guy, technology guy. You view government as a technology or a systems of rules. Um, and clearly you saw that the jurisdictional, the physical territory is a must-have or a necessary requirement to make these happen. Like, I'm kind of curious, like, why was that the case? And then what sort of systems or rules, interest you to deploy within that territory?
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, like y'all in cyberspace have it super easy, and that's why you're like a billion miles ahead of us, right? One way to look at my work is trying to bring some of the good characteristics of the world of bits to the world of atoms. Online, you have low switching costs, you have low barrier to entry, and so we can do all kinds of amazing things. And we have institutions evolve much better, and governance of blockchains is super competitive. Um, and that's one reason I'm frustrated about the ocean is that Admiralty law actually has this super cool virtual property where some people think that like you can do anything on the high seas. It's not like that at all. Um, what it is that each ship has to register with an existing country, and it's like franchising the sovereignty of that country. And you could change your registration every year. So it's a virtual association between the ship and the country, which makes for like a very competitive market. Like you just have to find one country in the world that will work with you to let you have what autonomy you want. And so this is like a super cool aspect of the sea. So I wish that it was more economically feasible to build there. But on land, I think things just don't work as well because we have these giant geographic monopolies, and land is not rearrangeable. One thing that I've been really happy about in the charter city world. I just found this out about the Catawba SEZ, which is the only one in the U.S. That you can the tribe has the right under North and South Carolina law to buy land on the private market and have it become part of the tribe. The Honduras
Wow.
Zeta program has the same thing. You buy land on the private markets and then it's incorporated in. In fact, I went to Próspera a month ago and I got gene therapy to make me stronger, which is like super, super cool. And the clinic that does the gene therapy is at the other end of the island from most of the charter city. It's just that building is opted into the jurisdiction. And we're working on a project in Africa I'm really excited about, where again, the legislation we're working on says that same thing. So this ability to like be non-contiguous and incorporate land into the jurisdiction, right, is more like that admiralty law. Like the thing is that this like metaphor of law as code, it's not just like a shallow metaphor. If you think of law as an infrastructure layer, like what's special about law is that to change the sewers you have to like go down and like move pipes around, but law is like just an agreement about what rules apply to what place. It's like a bit in a database, right, or like a line on a piece of paper. And so we can be using it much more flexibly. We could have, there's no reason that a person's property couldn't opt into a different legal system in some way, or do it like module by module. Be like, okay, like here's an example of this really happening in Dubai. I'm not sure the rest of the UAE, but they made it so that foreigners who are living in Dubai can be under their home country's family law, not for like I think most EU countries. And the reason is that family law, it only governs relations between the family. This is things like, who, like what happens in a divorce, who gets the kids, the rules of a marriage. And so if a family opts into it, that doesn't affect anybody else in the country, right? It only governs them. And so they recognize, hey, here's a case where we could just flip this bit. And a family could choose German family law if they wanted to. Of course, they're entrepreneurial. They want to attract people to live there. And people don't want, people who are not Muslims do not want to live under Muslim family law. And so that's just this characteristic of law that I think that we are like way under exploiting, that it actually is a virtual layer. It is like code, and we could be, remixing it. And law is open source, by the way, because anything that's not a secret policy is published in its entirety. So all law is open source, and we can be copying it and forking it. So I think this is something that just needs to be used way more, is that it kind of, the law, like it is a cyberspace attribute in a sense. It's like a virtual attribute of of physical places, and we're not using it as such. But yeah, I think of my mission as trying to make governance in the world of atoms be a bit more like things are in the world of bits. And that's why, it's why crypto is way ahead of starting new countries. Because it's out there in cyberspace where it's just innately easier to do new things.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I guess my hope is that like I mean, there's a lot of things to unpack there that like really excite me, right? Like first going to a different jurisdiction where a gene therapy is has more freedom to unroll or deploy into markets. This idea of having non-contiguous sort of establishment of jurisdiction is also, I mean, it exists, already, but like to have more of a process around that and like have the private markets engage in that kind of activity is super fascinating to me. And then like having different countries already adopting or allowing themselves to change how certain aspects of law work within their jurisdiction is also incredible. And I guess like where do you see that going? Like, I mean, surely that must inspire you and like make you feel like it's like going on the right track in some way.
Yeah, definitely. Another example I'm excited about right now is um, is this open source idea. So one of our companies, Metropolis, working in Palau and some other countries in the South Pacific, Palau is creating a corporate registry where you can incorporate using the laws of Delaware to start, and then they'll add other jurisdictions because just like a German couple in Dubai, their family law affects them. If you're going to register an offshore corporation in Palau, like, why should Palau have to write some new corporate law for that? Like, why try to reinvent the wheel when they can just use best practices? Delaware law and the new precedents that are set, are freely available. And so they incorporate Delaware law by reference, not by copying. It updates as the law updates. They're importing it like a software library. And this way you could use your standard startup docs, right? Or you could port a Taiwanese corporation to Palau if you're worried about the security of Taiwan, using all of your same corporate documents and resolutions, just copying them over. So these things are happening. I talked to someone in Próspera a month ago who's working with El Salvador to pass Delaware corporate law for the country. So these kinds of amazing things are happening, and I think it's just, I'm I guess I have a desire for change, but I'm queuing in on an actual like fact about the structure of the world here with viewing laws as code. And so as you know, you get the word out and other people, independently discover it that you can have law be more flexible, it's just going to happen more and more. And so, we have a legal system on GitHub. It's called ULEX. It's
From work, yeah.
yeah, Tom Bell's work. It's an attempt to create kind of a kernel, right? Like a simplified generic kernel. I have this metaphor that the way that legal systems are right now is, it's like, what if every country only ran operating system that like had been written by that country, or like maybe the colonizers came in and they brought in some bits of their own operating system, and then they left. And like, instead of everybody using Linux, or Linux and its competitors, right? Like there's no, I don't like law as a technology, right? And we shouldn't have to keep like reinventing it from scratch. Like, I want to see a world where you have legal systems on GitHub, where you have standard kernels, where you have distributions, right? Like, oh, because if there's a whole bunch of different like modules and variations of that modules that different jurisdictions are trying, then you're going to need somebody to package them up in a distribution, right? And like all of those open source concepts, I think we'll have for law, and so that's
I mean,
super exciting for me.
absolutely. Like I'm very very familiar with Tom Bell's book, Your Next Government, and his idea around autocentric law and polycentric law and these sort of things. And to that end, I was a little bit disappointed with the current version of ULEX because it's pointing to the American Law Institute's restatements of law, right? Tort law, contracts, and so on. And so to that end, similar to your homegrown DIY blogging platform, we've been working on a platform that allows us to reconstitute the restatements of law, right? Because the black letter rules themselves are under copyright and enforced by the ALI. And so, Tom makes the argument in his book, like why that might not be the case, or why you could argue that it is in the public domain. It is convincing in some ways, but it hasn't been tested. But if you could then restate the restatements, and establish these, then you could get that body of law, that kernel, into GitHub and have version control and all of these things. And then ideally, that's the basis for your arbitration system that is running on top of an order that can't be easily tampered with. So yeah, no, I'm right there with you. And on the registries, like that's also fantastic. I was speaking to a guy from Kenya who lived outside of Nairobi, and there was a dispute between himself and another claimant on a deed to property, right, to real estate, which necessitated him a week of travel to Nairobi to go to the registry and find out that both of you had the same claim, right? Like just the paper-based system or corruption basically failed them, right? And so he spent 2 weeks get there and back didn't resolve it. Where if you had, that registry on something that was a bit more accessible, I guess, then maybe you could save these like 2 weeks of transaction costs in establishing that and still being at square one. Um, so yeah, I think very similarly on that front. Okay, so I guess like you've moved to land now. You're looking at charter city, like at cities and setting up startup cities, special economic zones. So maybe moving a little bit further down the spectrum away from secessionists. I'm curious, and you've established Pronomos now, right? This venture capital firm that is working on that. Could you speak a little bit about it and like what's the investment thesis of this new entity?
Sure. So pronomos, it's from nomos, which is the ancient Greek word for law, which was the ancient Greek word for custom, and then they made the same word law because they felt that law was derived bottom up as like a hardening of customs. Um, and it's the only charter city investment fund. Started it about 4 years ago, and I started working on it after I saw Próspera get its initial approvals in 2017, and started to see, that with the crypto boom, there was more and more money going to people who believed in these kinds of ideas, and more countries interested in charter cities ideas. And so I decided to start a fund so that I could work kind of across the industry and helping make these things happen. We're a very small $13 million fund, anchored by Peter Thiel, who's been my main supporter in my career. And we've got just incredible investors like Balaji, Naval, Mark Andreessen, Roger Ver, Brock Pierce, Olivia Janssens from crypto. Really blessed to have a lot of amazing people. And we've invested in, I think it's 11 companies now. Over 4 years, we're about 60% deployed. And, the thesis is just that we invest in cities, they get to write most of their own laws. That's the way I say it now. I've been having to like both laser focus and kind of say no a lot, because with network states and seasteading, and there's a huge wave of like non-sovereign communities happening, like just people like are ready to reinvent how we live together. And I have this idea of like of a sovereign community as like a group of people who say, we're going to take some portion of the way life is lived, of like the civilizational tech stack that we think is shit, and we're going to rewrite it, and then live under it and test it. And this could be education. I talked to someone about a healthcare city I'm really excited about. It could be all kinds of things, but there's a huge wave of it. But that's not my thing. So I've had to like come up with this like kind of brief phrase, and it's this like cities that write most of their own laws. And so that's what we invest in. And I guess I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but like the hope is that you invest at early stage software valuations in companies that end up managing like multi-billion-dollar real estate portfolios. And if you can do that, then you'll do well. So we invest generally pre-seed and seed. We've done like our two largest checks are like 1.1 and 1.5 million. Smallest checks are 100K. And those larger checks are in Próspera, which is like the only operating charter city, and then just this fall in our own company that we've started ourselves working in Africa. And that's it. I kind of have like the longest history in this space and the biggest idea maze. So we're a bit more hands-on than the average VC, although still, it's mostly up to the founders always. And we also do like matching people up with vendors, occasionally talking to countries, although surprisingly rare. If you told me 5 years ago that I wouldn't bother talking to countries, I would have said you're crazy. Like in the 2010s, there was like French Polynesia working with the seasteading with Blue Frontiers and seasteading for a bit. You had Honduras and like It's like kind of it. You were lucky if like there was a country that would talk to you like once every 5 years. Um, but now, this wave is happening. I think like the 21st century is here. I have this line that the 21st century started in 2020. Just meaning that COVID brought an end to like the delusion that things worked the old way. And
Mm.
so there's more and more countries realizing that they have to do things in 21st century ways. But what my shortage is, which I hear is true all the time, is founders. So I don't follow up with countries because I don't have any great founding teams to put on projects. Like that's the shortage. And I need to think more about why this is. It's something I'm going to work on this coming year. But one thing is just the scale and the ambition of it, right? I mean, I have unicorn CEOs tell me like, wow, that's like so much bigger than what I would consider working on, to start like a new jurisdiction. Even if it's a charter city and not a country, it's huge. It's a huge undertaking. And ambition is rare in this world. I also think that to operational founders, this is still kind of like not pie in the sky, but like it's a cool idea that like will happen and should happen someday off in the unknown future. And I need to get the word out to these guys that like, no, you can roll up your sleeves and do it now. I can connect you to countries. I can talk to you about what the milestones are, what your team should look like. Like it's time. Like you can do this. And so I think that there's other reasons, but that's kind of a big bottleneck in the space. And that's why our last three checks that took us from 40 to 60% deployed were like to no new founders. It was to two existing companies and to our own company that we started. So yeah,
Okay.
that's
Well,
how it is.
so yeah, I mean, there's kind of two things to unpack, and like we should have probably got to this a bit earlier. Like you mentioned that there now is this wave, and like there's all of this sort of this Cambrian explosion, or I guess like finally these thousands of startup societies are finally blooming or starting to bloom in a way. Um, and my question was going to be like, well, why do you think someone would go to one of these places or live under, like, what is the benefit to an individual or a community to even do this?
Yeah, I mean it's a better jurisdiction. If you look at studies of what drives economic growth, the quality of the institutions and lack of corruption are huge factors. I've lately been thinking in terms of kind of like, let's say, like community first versus economic first, where a
Okay.
community first city is the kind that I would want to live in, where you get a group of people with a certain set of values that are not well served by existing countries, and where those values would actually drive them to want different laws. You know, could be libertarians. Could be all kinds of different groups. People who want to live in a city without plastics. Um,
Right.
and you bring that group of people together online, and this is very much the network state model of Balaji's. Is you have your one moral commandment, you form a tribe online, people get to know each other, you meet up in person at intervals. The new innovation of this year is the pop-up community pioneered by Zuzulu, where 200 people got together for 2 months,
I was part
living
of
together.
Yeah.
Yeah, it, it it was amazing. And so just kind of starting off online, but adding the offline component more and more over time. And then, and Praxis is the leader of this. They've got 15,000 people. They've had an offer from a government, and, fingers crossed they'll be the next one to, announce that they're actually going to build a charter city. And so we'll see. Well, like Praxis seems like maybe they're doing it. That's awesome. I know like this is like what I would want to live in, but as an investor and an entrepreneur, like man, is it hard to convince people with like great lives in the developed world to go and move someplace else. yeah, I want to live together with my people in like a country that's based around my values, but like, man, moving like away from my family, I have kids,
The switch
it's a
costs like
big ask.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas the economic driven is if you say in Africa, there's 20 to 30 million people a year moving to cities because it's still urbanizing. And it has the youngest population by far in the world. I mean, like, what isn't like half of Nigeria under 18 or something crazy? So there's new people being born. They're moving to cities. You don't have to convince anyone to move anywhere. You don't need a sales department. You just need to build a city that's like a bit nicer than alternatives. And like, people will move there. So it's an
Yeah.
entirely different thing. Or if you build a city around some resource, some industry cluster, like really, if you have a set of laws that's much better for some type of business and you can partner with those businesses and set up a zone where you're able to provide better jobs, based on this kind of economic driver of like better laws means it's better for the business, means they can pay more to employees. Like again, you don't need it. Your sales department is your job postings. Like and like that's how the United States grew, right? The United States in the 19th and first half of the 20th century, when there were years that 1 million people a year moved here, when the population was much smaller. That was all economic driver. Like there was land, there was economic opportunity, and people were willing to pick up and move, across an ocean that was a much, much bigger journey back then with a lot more uncertainty because of that driver. And so I'm kind of torn between this like community as being like advanced, like, high up on Maslow's hierarchy thing that I want to live in. But like as an investor, I feel like, it's the economic. Just build a city where there's better jobs and that's it. You've answered the question of why will someone go live there?
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, maybe first one comes first, and then the proceeds from that gets it reinvested into the other one.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's my hope.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, like this sort of founder shortage problem or team shortage problem. Like, what is the ideal formation there, and like, what are the capital costs, for establishing, one of these charter cities? Or like, how do you think about that?
Yeah. So team is something I've changed my mind on lately. I mean, I will say that I think it's mostly just the standard like entrepreneur, like except they have to be maybe a lot more ambitious than the average entrepreneur. But all of those startup skills are just the first thing. At the end of the day, it's a startup, and then the I think the other two skills that are important. One of them is community growth. Especially if you're taking this community direction. But in general, getting the first, even if it's economically driven, the first 100 people, the first 1,000 people, like this is a community. Like you need to nurture it. You need to learn the culture, and have people feel inspired. And then the other is real estate development. That's just at the end of the day, that's what this is. It's not why I'm in it, right? I want to like start new countries that, have way better legal systems, but what we're doing is real estate development. And so all of those skills, I met up with a libertarian, the rare like hard libertarian real estate developer a couple weeks ago. I hadn't seen in 10 years, and he made a really compelling case that like, what does a real estate developer do? They have some vision for what this will be and why people want to live there, and they wrangle the capital, they wrangle the permits, they come up with like the sales process, and they kind of do everything, like all the glue to make it happen. And that's really what we need. So I think those are kind of the main skill sets.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, I guess we're coming up close to time. Now, is there anything you want to discuss or talk about? Any other sort of thoughts that you think are worth bringing up?
Hmm.
I have one for. I guess maybe
Yeah, bring
to
it.
narrow down the question, like books. What kind of books would you recommend? You know, either founders that are interested in these ideas, or just like how and understanding how governments work or don't work. Like, what are your recommended reads?
Yeah, I'm a little bit delinquent on putting together my reading list, but I have actually been assembling it here, like on my bookcase. I have a section of like the books that formed my worldview, and then I have a whole shelf of like utopian escapist fiction, mostly libertarian, which is divided into two sections. The stuff that's like based on seasteading and my work, and then the stuff that's not. And I have a haters section that's very important. Um, you know, multiple books published in the last couple of years that are, about hating on this whole movement. But the list that we do have, the Charter Cities Institute has a good recommended reading list, and my old blog, Let a Thousand Nations Bloom, which was the first group blog about competitive governance that I started with Mike Gibson, now 1517 Fund, and some others, has 10 years out of date, but it's really good. Has a lot of the classics. Um, but it's things like public choice theory. My favorite is Mansur Olson. My dad's Laws, Order, and Machinery of Freedom. Jane
Excellent
Jacobs,
books.
I think, is really important. The Lee Kuan Yew biography, From Third World to First. There's I think there's at least one good Dubai story as well. Um, Ed Glazer on cities. I mean, there's this one good book called How to Start Your Own Country, which was written in the, I don't know, 80s, early 90s,
All right.
which was like, it was unusual in that this space was so LARPy, right? Like micronations, it was mostly people who were like, let me make up my own flag
Thoughts.
and anthem. And that's fine. If that's what's fun for you, I think that's awesome. But How to Start Your Own Country was a guy who actually took the idea seriously and wrote a whole small book about, you know, how could you actually do this? So that one's still a classic.
I think there's another book that came out on micronations by Cambridge, Micronations and the Search for Sovereignty by Harry Hobbs and George Williams, I think it is. But it actually treats the phenomenon quite seriously, right? It's a good read. I think you'd enjoy it if you haven't come across your way.
Cool.
You're probably familiar with it all anyway. Cool. I guess like the hater section was kind of interesting, and I guess that kind of propped up another idea in my mind. Like, we kind of touched upon some of the trials and tribulations of like manifesting this idea into reality. You've seen some success, and like more of it's coming. Um, what kind of the sort of criticisms have you received, and like how do you answer them? I guess.
I mean, there's lots. I
Top
have a good
three.
time.
Yeah.
I mean, I've spent 20 years hearing the criticisms and responding, and I don't know. I think it's fun. I think I feel like the biggest category is the people who see it as some kind of like evil neo-colonialist capitalist enslavement and exploitation. People who sort of live in zero-sum economic models where if somebody wins, somebody has to lose, and they assume that like if we are like building something in a country and people like choose to go work there, that they're like losing out. I mean, it's nonsense, but it's just how a lot of people think. And then I mean, less nonsense is just concerns about power imbalances, right? And about like here's a standard one is like, will there be a two-tier system, right? If you have some combination of, let's say, digital nomads from the developed world and people from the host country, those are going to be two pretty different groups of people at different levels of wealth, different uh, economic niches. And, it is something that you should worry about. But I guess I see these cities, the goal is to uplift the country and the region, to mix together people who have this like valuable experience at doing things like starting countries, and people who have like hustle and drive. And I think at the end of the day, there's the criticisms about like it can't work, and then there's the criticism about it'll be bad. And I think the it'll be bad stuff, it's based on like imagining a future. It's like being in some fantasy world in your mind that is untethered from reality. And to me, this is the whole point. Like with seasteading, I was like, look, like instead of arguing, over beers or whatever on Twitter about, will this society be good? Will that one be good? Is mine better? All that crap. Like, let us build it and look at it, right? Let's evaluate a society by how it actually is, the real thing, and not like our imagination. Whoa, Siri did not like that. And and instead of just reflecting our political prejudices, or the direction that we predict things will go, which is rarely right, like, what if we visit a place? What if we talk to the people and say, hey, do you feel exploited? And if we think they won't tell the truth, let's just find someone who moved out, right? Like, let's see how these things actually are in practice. And so I'm almost coming to a, like, my inclination for a long time would be like to argue with these people, right? And now my inclination is kind of like, you know what? I hear you think it'll be like that. I don't. Come back in 5 years and let me know what you think. Like, it's just not even worth engaging in an argument with just somebody's imagination,
Yeah.
when we can find out what the reality is.
Absolutely. I mean, and if you can make a system that can prove that there's cheap exit costs and cheap voice costs, and um, uh, yeah, like it is voluntary, and I guess also another part of that is governmental immunity, right? If you can show that there is no governmental immunity, and like the government is held to civil liabilities, then like you can make a strong argument that those kind of arguments would not really
Yeah.
stand up to scrutiny. And like, of course, people can have those opinions, but they wouldn't reach a larger or broader population. I think the colonialism one is also quite interesting. I mean, there's a lot of baggage and almost educational conditioning that's behind that. But yeah, I think that's nonsense as well. Or depending on the actual startup society and what the rules and structures are, and these sort of things. Um, okay, well, I guess like we're out of time. I just want to say thank you so much for speaking with me, and I hope you get to see and experience the society of your dreams in reality. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.